Yes, she holds a larger lead at the national level, but in the swing states, Trump holds the lead.
First of all, Cliff, give us a sense, if you can, with 2 weeks to go, what are the polls saying, both nationally and in the key swing states?
Yeah, so it is a an election like it's balancing on a needle right now. It's very, very close. Though we've had some trend towards Trump, both at the national level as well as in the key swing states. Ever so slight. We're not talking 5 points here, 5 points there. It's a half a point here, a quarter point there. Very, very close, but trending Trump.
And has the kind of pattern been in recent months that Kamala Harris has a slightly bigger lead? I mean, it's a very narrow lead, but a slightly bigger lead in the national horse race compared to what's happening in the battleground states, where it pretty much is neck and neck.
Yeah, exactly. So she holds a little bit less than a 2 point lead at the national level. She's been holding a lead since she stepped into the race. Now, that lead has narrowed over the last 10 days or so. And in the key swing states, it's neck and neck, though I would say it's trending more Trump right now than Harris, once again, over the last 10 days or so. So, yes, she holds a larger lead at the national level, but in the swing states, Trump holds the lead.
And to what extent are we seeing any movement? Because the thing that always amazes me is, American political debate is so polarized, it is hard to imagine there are that many undecided voters who are switching even now. But are you picking that up in your polling? Are there people who are switching from one side to the other?
There's no one really switching from one side to the other. It's really picking up people that say they won't vote to having them say they will vote. So it's much more about mobilizing your base. And that's what the two campaigns are doing right now. They're really hammering home the key messages, trying to convince, one, their primary base, and two, those that are sort of on the fence to come out and vote for them.
And as a pollster, how do you do that? How do you measure the likelihood of someone to vote? I mean, particularly on the Trump side, there has been this sense that in the last two elections, pollsters have underestimated the level of Republican support. Is that something you've tried to compensate for?
Yeah, it's been a huge challenge in 2016 and 2020. The polling industry erred by about 3 points. Understated Trump, overstated the Dems. And that's something we've focused on over the last 4 years. We think we got it right as an industry, but we will see. But ultimately, yeah, this is an extremely close race. Any half point here or half point there could really redefine what will ultimately happen. And our big focus from this point until the end of the electoral cycle will be making sure that we have robust samples in those key swing states.
Is there a chance that pollsters have overcorrected and that the level of Trump support is now inflated in these polls, and we may end up being surprised on polling day by the level of support for the Democrats?
Yeah, that there is a possibility. I would say probably it's a low possibility, a low probability. A lot of pollsters in the market today are using pass vote to correct their samples to try to overcome that Trump understatement. You had some experience back in the past in the UK, not such good experience, I think, in maybe the far distant past, right? We had some experience recently at IPSOS in both Turkey and Brazil where there was a slight overstatement of the right. So this is something that we're worried about at IPSOS, that we're really focusing on. I think the market as well. But there is that possibility. But I think, once again, I think we're probably in a better place than we were in 2020.
Can we break down some of the numbers inside these polls, Cliff? I mean, people talk about the different demographic groups, and people say that Donald Trump has been doing very well really throughout his political career with non-college educated white voters. The Kamala Harris is doing a lot better with women than Donald Trump is. What are we seeing in some of these numbers?
Yeah, and so we're seeing that is the trend. In other words, Trump does better with men, does better with lower educated or less educated Americans. Kamala Harris does better with women and more educated Americans. And in both those cases, Trump leads near double digits with with men and less educated Americans. And Harris, on the flip side, is leading by about double digits with women and more educated Americans. So it's really the tale of two Americas. America, once again, that's extremely polarized. These are sorts of trends that we don't expect to change. They're pretty much set in stone. Now, there are some key demographics, key constituencies that have been hurt by inflation. More specifically, younger Americans, Black Americans, and Hispanic Americans, which were important in constituting the Biden coalition in 2020. That sort of migrated away from the fold because of inflation. This is why Biden had problems with his numbers, both his approval ratings as well as his voting intention, and that Harris has been tried to bring back into the fold. And Trump has made some inroads, especially in the key swing states, with his anti-inflation message. So really where we're going to see movement is with those key constituency groups, which I just noted, and the two campaigns are really doubling down there.
And it is interesting how it appears as if Donald Trump is gaining ground among minority voters, and in particular Hispanic voters as well. A lot was made at the last election of the level of Trump support in the Miami-Dade County of Florida, which previously had been a proper swing county, but he was increasingly growing his support base there, in part because of the Cuban American population. Are we seeing that trend continue? Are we seeing Donald Trump continue to make progress among minority voters and in particular Hispanic voters?
Yeah, we look at Hispanic voters, we look at Latino voters. That's the fastest growing segment in the United States today. When you look at their profile, they're sort of like the average American. They're not so conservative, they're not so liberal, they're somewhere in between. They really vote the pocketbook. They will vote more Harris than Trump this electoral cycle, but Trump has made inroads there. The Republicans have made inroads, especially in the border states. One of the key swing states is Arizona. There's a huge problem of unfettered immigration or migration into the country because of that. And the anti-immigration messages by the Republicans and Trump are having an effect with Latinos who do not like it as well, like the average American. And so, yes, to your question, Latinos are an important segment. I wouldn't say there's a long-term trend towards Republicans, but on the margins, they could define the day for the Republicans.
Yeah, the margins could be crucial. What about the issues that are central in this election, Cliff? Because a lot of people are saying, look, if the most important issues to people are the cost of living and immigration, that naturally favors Donald Trump. But if issues such as the future of American democracy and abortion maybe are higher in people's list of concerns, that naturally helps the Harris campaign. What are voters saying are their priorities?
Yeah, and the rank order is the same at the national level as well as in the key swing states. And number one is inflation or the cost of living. That's critical. The second issue is threats to democracy. That tends to be a Democratic issue. Then it's immigration. That tends to be a Republican issue. Abortion's really not high up there, but what I would call it much more a mobilizing issue, an issue that reinforces Harris's credibility, helps her with the base. And ultimately, that number one issue, inflation, Trump has the lead. And so, we've often said over the last month or so that on the one hand, Harris leads on the vibes. That is the enthusiasm, her step in and Biden's step out in the race really helped the Democrats. But Trump still dominates the fundamentals, more specifically inflation.
Do personal approval ratings matter? Because if you look at Kamala Harris's, she's got about a net zero approval rating, which in relative terms isn't bad these days, probably in American politics. Donald Trump's on about -9. Does that matter?
Yeah, it goes into the overall voter calculus and reflection. You want to be better liked than less liked. That will help you along. I do think that on the Trump side, there's an upper ceiling. Indeed, the reason the campaign, more specifically the election, is as close as it is. I believe is because of his high rejection rates or his low favorability rates. So they do matter. They help kind of define the contours of the election. And so if they're not a primary factor, they're an important secondary factor in decision making.
Is that basically Donald Trump having kind of a high base, a low ceiling, that we know he's almost certainly going to get about 46% of the votes, and there's 46% of the country who are firmly behind him. But getting much beyond 48% is going to be difficult. So he's got that kind of narrow window of support.
Yeah, I think that's a conventional wisdom. I think the data play that out. I think your favorability scores were spot on. They capture that. I think that's what we're seeing today. We believe, kind of the market believes, sees sort of this country today as a +2 Dem at the national level. Like it's more Democratic leaning than Republican leaning at the national level. In the key swing states, it's always a coin toss. Whether that holds up on election day, we will see. But yeah, Trump does have a ceiling that makes this race much closer than probably should be, given the fact that he dominates the fundamentals.
And just finally, Cliff, is there any polling data on who most Americans perceive as being the candidate who represents change? Because I've heard a lot of people say this is another change election. For many years now, America's been in a restless mood and wanting to change. In 2020, the voters wanted to fire Trump. This time around, they wanted to fire Biden. They won't get the chance to do that directly, but he won't be president next time around. And you could make the argument that Harris represents change because she'd be a new president, never been in the White House before as president, obviously an historic candidate in many respects. Equally, you could make the argument that Donald Trump represents change because it would be a change in the current administration. Who do voters see as the change candidate?
Yeah, this is a great question, James, because this is the dispute. This is the electoral battle. It's over uh, what is change, right? And so it's murky. We did a poll about 3 weeks ago here at Ipsos to get at that, and it really depends how you frame it. Depending on how you frame it, one candidate is seen as change versus the other. So Donald Trump's seen as sort of the anti-inflation candidate, the candidate that will make things better than they are today. People are comparing to 4 years ago, and they're saying it's not going well. We need someone new. It's a very traditional change candidate, right? On the flip side, Harris and her campaign don't like that framing, don't like being put on that dimension, and are trying to make the argument that America needs to look towards the future, the opportunity economy for all Americans. And they've been framing things along that dimension, the future versus the past. I would say, and by the way, both are on message, given what each campaign has intrinsically in their quiver. But ultimately, I think that right now Trump is winning out on that because his argument's an easier argument than her argument.